Brave New Conversations is funded by subscribers like you.
After 8 years of dropping how many millions of pounds of bombs, firing how many millions of rounds of ammunition, and on the other hand spending how many billions of dollars in development aid, if after 8 years people haven't joined your side, they're probably not going to join your side. Well, they probably have a good reason for being on another side than you.
And the point to keep gripping on to, too, is that these people who looked favorably on the Russians and now look favorably on us did not win. And part of the reason they were not able to win support or to destroy or to neutralize the other people in that country. And there's no reason to think that it will happen now.
And just like Ambassador Eichenberry said in his dissent to the troop increase, which I'm very proud of. I'm very proud to have served with him, and especially proud to have seen his dissent. There's a dependency. After 8 years, the Afghan government is dependent upon us to do everything. And it was most likely the same way in the Soviets. That's why Najibullah only survived for 3 years, because he was dependent upon an outside power to keep him propped up. Same way with Karzai. He's dependent upon us to prop him up, and he's not even worthy to be propped up. He's corrupt, illegitimate, has no interests in bettering his country. Really, only him and his people are only really interested in lining their pockets. And you see the people he surrounds himself with. War crimes. The people he surrounds himself with, like Fahim and Dastum, and these guys are war crimes villains, drug traffickers, and not like drug traffickers like they've got a pound of pot in their pocket. You're talking guys who are dealing in hundreds and thousands of kilos of heroin. These are very despicable, horrible people that our troops should not be dying in support of. It's a shame on us that they are.
Yeah, and another aspect of that I noticed in reading this stuff is we'll be there until they, the phrase they used in Vietnam, we'll stand down as they stand up. We're there to provide a shield while they will take over the task. Well, since they're well aware from past experience that they will never be able to do it by themselves, the more they stand up and show capability and offensive fighting force and discipline and everything else, there's every prospect that the U.S. will use that as an excuse to leave, whereupon they lose. So their incentive to take over the fighting from the U.S. is nowhere on, I'm referring to the Vietnam experience, of course, as well, but I would sure it apply here as well, because on the one hand, if somebody else can do the fighting a lot better than you can anyway, because of their helicopters, their intelligence, their communications, their weapons and everything, why should you do it? That's one point. And the other point is, if you become capable to substitute yourself for them, they leave, in which case you're there alone and you cannot succeed. So there's really no incentive to ever, so long as the U.S. troops are there, to stand up and do that. All right, you're talking from somebody who went over there and the problems you faced when you went over there, as I went to Vietnam in 1965. And one gets caught up in the question of, couldn't this be done better? Surely better than we're doing, as it could have been.
And it's really easy, particularly this is what I did for my living for 12 years. So it's really easy just to have this conversation wrapped around the how of it or the mechanics of it, and that's not, we should be talking about the why.
No, and you and I could talk about that for a long time with great interest. But you said it so well in your resignation letter, and since then, that you didn't leave, you didn't take this unusual action, extraordinary action really, not only to leave, but to speak out and work against the policy, to try to warn people, not just quietly go on to some other line of business. Not because of the way we were doing it, or that it could be done better, but why? And whether we should be doing it at all. And that's the question you raised, which is
absolutely
is
why and to what end, not the how. I don't want to debate what General McChrystal says. Why and to what end are we in Afghanistan?
Because when I'll finish this off if I may, and wanted to dismiss it. You and I could talk about, we didn't have the language, we didn't. So you can say, well, that's easy. We can learn languages. Send it to the language school. We'll send them to counterinsurgency school. And I think there's a fundamental thing that's being missed in that. the counterinsurgency doctrine, which the Army seems to have adopted now as our new way of doing things. This is what we're going to do in the future. They're missing not only that it could be done, they see correctly it could be done better in some sense than we've done in the past, with fewer casualties on both sides and more efficiency, and we could stay longer and cheaper and so forth. But there's a fundamental flaw in the idea of counterinsurgency in U.S. hands as applied in our hands to foreign countries. And that is, hard as it is for Americans to conceive of this, we're foreigners there.
Yeah.
And we remain foreigners even after we've been to counterinsurgency school,
Yeah.
and even if we learn their language.
Yeah.
The idea that by a certain set of cookbook rules on counterinsurgency, you can get people to accept your authority and to fight for you and to accept the authority of the people you have designated as proxies to rule over them is false.
Yeah.
I would even go so far as to say that I don't think any foreign country has ever applied counterinsurgency in the sense of winning the actual willing support of the people and the authority of the people. It's never happened. It's not going to happen. And there is the question of whether you have a right. Yes, if you believe that empire run by Americans is the good empire as opposed to evil empires, and that we have a right to do this, to run the world, basically, then you can ask the question of how we do it. Let me mention one other analogy from both my experience but the Soviet experience. When I was there in '86, as I was saying, they were showing the brochures in Russia, in Moscow. I spoke to, well, I'm reading the same documents you were talking about from the National Security Archive, which are amazing. I totally agree with you. You're reading the same thing now or next year in Obama's cabinet. Oh my God, you know, but if we leave, people will say we were feckless. Why were our troops killed already? We made a mistake earlier. We've been disloyal. We're leaving our allies and stuff like that. We're a failure. But a guy named Velikov, very good guy, Evgeny Velikov, who was the top science advisor to Gorbachev, and I was talking to him mainly about nuclear policy, which he was very involved in, and which I wanted to influence. So I wanted to talk to him about nuclear arms control. But we got on to Afghanistan. And he said, and he was a top advisor to Gorbachev at that point. Now, if you've been reading these documents, you know, that's just when Gorbachev had been in for 1 year saying, this isn't working. What can we do? You know, how do we get out?
It's similar to, I know conversations with folks on Capitol Hill and in administration of, what the hell are we doing?
And how can we get out? So, but one very strong point is I was just reading these documents. I was reading something that Velikov had said to me at the time that was clearly now being said on the inside, which is, we need to get out, and all we ask is a neutral government friendly to us. That's all we want to leave behind, a friendly government there on our border. Not too much to ask, you know. So we've been, after all, think of all we've spent, and we've been dying. So Velikov said that to me. He said, we're getting out. We're getting out. All we ask, this was '86, early '86 now, they got out in early '89, 3 years later. So he said, all we ask, all we want is a friendly, neutral government. And I said, Evgeny, you're not getting out. You have not started to get out. You are not on the way out. You're there. You will not start to get out until you give up the determination to decide what government will succeed you, and to determine the government of Vietnam. If that's the problem, you have to stay there to do it. And eventually they did, to my surprise, actually, even sooner than I expected. But it took a while, a long time. And we're hearing that now, you know, if only all we ask, you know, in Afghanistan is this or that.
We keep changing our goals. We went there for I don't think you'll find anyone who will argue against us actually going there in 2001. Certainly, if you find someone, I have a question why they would argue against that. But it's now 2009. We keep changing what our goals are. We keep changing what we want to get out of this, what the benefit of our troops dying is for. And we keep changing it, and it's wrong. I mean, we went there for one particular or specific reason, we've accomplished that, we need to move on.
What it comes down to is there really aren't many good reasons for killing other people en masse. I'm not a total pacifist, you're not a total pacifist. And there have been reasons in the past. World War II is the big shining example.
If there was some benefit to the United States, if this was going to make the United States safer, I would be all for our occupation there. But it's not making us safer. So I'm very realist in a lot of these things I say. And just, foreign policy should be done for the benefit of the United States. It's very simple.
We've said this so much, maybe we can put it in earlier, but something I've been thinking here. A big analogy is our total unwillingness to learn anything from the French experience in Vietnam, which was against the same people in the same terrain, literally the same leaders and the same cadre, in the same terrain there with American money. So we didn't bother to translate the French books on the war. I spent a lot of effort trying to get Rand, with some success, to translate a couple of the books that they never bothered to learn, because the French, they lost 2 world wars. We had to come in and help them, They're racist, unlike us. That didn't even have to be said. They're racist. That's a problem. They're colonialists, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And they didn't have helicopters. That's
so
going to make. They don't have a few helicopters. That's going to make all the difference. Well, again, we don't learn from the Russians, and I think what it comes down to is, yes, for all their brutality, and yes, Russia is a different society and so forth. I think we should be telling our leaders right now, or asking them, give us a good reason why we will have any greater success than the Soviets did. I don't think there is a reason.
No, I think the only thing we have for us is the only reason why we think we do better than the Soviets is our own hubris. That's the only reason I think so. There's a book called The Bear Went Over the Mountain. It was written at the end of the 80s, I believe, by a guy named Grass, I think. I can't remember. However, it's a very good primer on the Soviets' tactical experiences in Afghanistan fighting the Mujahideen. My friend who went in with 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines into Helmand Province in the summer of 2008. It was very bloody in 2-7, lost a lot of good dudes. But after they were done, they took this book, The Bear Went Over the Mountain, and they took out the tactical and graphic overlays, the illustrations of how the Mujahideen fought the Soviets. And then they took those overlays of ambushes and other attacks, and then they looked at their own experiences. And in some cases, almost down to the same terrain features, same geographical features, they were attacked the same way that the Afghans had attacked the Soviets 20 years earlier. I mean, really remarkable. I mean, like literally almost identical. Remarkable.
I was smiling when you said that because I could see where it was going. It was exactly like that in Vietnam, where almost nobody ever looked at the French maps of where the Viet Cong, or then called the Viet Minh, had controlled. And of course, they were the same places that they controlled under us, where they had the support of the population thoroughly and where the terrain favored them.
One of the things people keep, one of the tenets of counterinsurgency is that you have to separate the insurgents from the population. One of the things we kept saying over there is, like, how do you separate the insurgents from the population when the population is or are the insurgents? And it's our unwillingness to acknowledge that there are a large group of people who are not on our side and who won't be on our side, and who were never on the side of the Afghans that are on our side, and who were never on the side of the foreign occupying powers. And we have to accept that and acknowledge that and realize that just fighting them will only beget more fighting. Putting more troops is only going to fuel this insurgency. I'm really afraid that we're going to put 20, 30, 40,000 more troops, and all we're going to do is put them in more valleys or villages where we're not presently at, and more people are going to fight us. Or we're going to do this thing where we secure the population centers and just barricade ourselves in, garrison ourselves in the population centers, support one side of the Afghan civil war, and just exacerbate that situation and allow it to continue without any real reconciliation.
Would you get out of Helmand Province?
I would. I would get out of large parts of Helmand. I would. There's no benefit for us being there.
So how far, let's say in the short run, if you were the president not worried about re-election, which is, there's never been a president like that in his first term. So, but...
And anyone who says that's not a concern for this president is a fool.
Or for any
lying.
president.
Yeah, for any president. Exactly.
If, however, you freed yourself from that notion somehow. How fast would you get out, and how many troops in the short run do you think you would leave there?
I
6 months from now, how many troops would there be already?
If you could responsibly withdraw troops, I mean, there's a lot of, as you know, tactical and logistical operational issues with something like that, and so you'd have to do it responsibly. But I would like to see us draw down to below 15,000, below 10,000, a bare minimum. To continue to train and support the Afghan army and police to a certain degree, but with the main point being of forcing some kind of political reconciliation in that country. They've been at civil war for 35 years. I don't understand why more people don't acknowledge that it's a civil war. There was a civil war. If you go back and look at how the media reported on Afghanistan, up until we invaded in 2001, it was constantly referred to as a civil war. Just because us and NATO showed up didn't make the civil war go away. It's still there. It's still raging. It's a prime conflict in that country. I would leave as many troops as necessary to foster some kind of or force some kind of reconciliation between two sides. But I would stop combat operations in those valleys, in those villages where people are fighting us only because they don't want us there. You have to understand this notion of what we call valleyism, which is nationalism scaled down to a valley level. That's what most people are concerned about. They're concerned about what happens in their valley. They don't want people coming in there, particularly people who are going to tax them or take things from them. And they will fight them if they do, just as you would find anywhere in this world. This is what would happen in the United States if something like that happened.
I've learned from you, listening to you the last couple of days, several points. One of them I think that is very familiar is your point that even the people we're training, especially the Tajiks and who are fighting for foreign, are themselves perceived as outsiders in the places where we're sending them to fight. Yeah. And have evoked much the same kind of resistance that we do when we go. And that another point, that a large part of the resistance to us is the perception that we are backing up an ethnically different and corrupt and self-serving government that isn't merely a puppet of us, but is an adversary of the people there.
Correct.
And that's part of it. That is considerably extent different from Vietnam. Let me take a minute, in fact, here. If they allow it, to mention that when I did hear your resignation letter first, my one reservation about it was your emphasis that you keep coming back to, which you've now enlightened me on, that it's being above all a civil war, and my resistance to that was that that was an insider's perception of the Vietnam War, which I thought was very misleading. Yeah. People who understood that it wasn't aggression from the North, because in fact the North, Vietnam, was not seen by Vietnamese as a truly independent, separate foreign country, but as part of Vietnam. Yeah. So the notion of aggression was not in their minds. Both sides had in their constitution, Vietnam is one. Yeah. Both sides had that. So they said, okay, it's not really aggression from the North, as we say. It's really a civil war between, they said, the Northerners or the communists and the communist-led forces and the others. And I came to feel that was very misleading for this reason, that it was a war that existed only because there was a warring side, that was entirely equipped, paid, basically managed by foreigners and serving the interests of foreigners. I said, that's not properly called a civil war. Yeah. That's a war against a neo-colonial power, let's say, or an imperial power. It's a war against foreigners, basically, and their servants and their collaborators. So to call it a civil war, I thought was a euphemism, or was misleading. Yeah. So when I heard it from you, I was initially resistant on this, because I was thinking, after all, they were fighting Soviets. Now they're fighting Americans. Yep. How is that a civil war? Well, there is this difference. In Vietnam, for many reasons, the communists, after the Second World, after 1954 in particular, had the prestige and the respect of everyone as having defeated the French invaders, who had been the colonial power for 90 years. And they had done that especially in the North. For that reason, even people who did not want communist rule, and that was most of the people, just as most of the people probably do not want Taliban rule or warlord rule.
Sure, yeah.
But, so it isn't as though they're popular. But in the case of the communists, and that may apply to the Taliban, they had the respect and legitimacy of having defeated a foreign invader. And given that, their claim to leadership of the whole of Vietnam was strong enough that even though people might not all have wanted that as their preference, they might have wanted Buddhist or sect or various other reasons, they were not going to fight it. Yeah. There was not going to be a war unless it was financed by the U.S. The U.S. was, in effect, for our interests, imposing a war that otherwise would not have been a war any more than there's a war now in Vietnam.
You know, the sad thing about all this and about any conflict is what, probably 90% of the people just want to be left alone, just want to raise their families and try and give their children a better life than what they had. In the case of Afghanistan, in parts of the South and parts of the East, it's so desperately and god-awfully poor that you're talking subsistence farmers. You're talking people who just are trying to get water out of the ground to get through life. You're talking the average, this is a culture or a society where life expectancy is 44 years. Mm-hmm. One in five children die before their 5th birthday. It's a culture so far removed from us in terms, or a society so far removed from us in terms of our understanding of what basic life is like. So many of those people just want to be left alone.
But that can sound like an appeal, if I finish with this, to our own compassion as Americans. Say, well, we should help to do something about that, and how can we help that, this terrible poverty? And I think what I learned from you, and from everything I hear about Afghanistan, we are not in the end, or even in the short run, going to be helping those impoverished people by occupying their country and fighting those who will continue to fight and risk their lives and kill and die to expel foreigners and outsiders, including the outsiders we back, the outsiders of their own language.
Exactly.
That we back. Yep. And so that it's an illusion, a delusion to think that we are helping those people, those victims, by victimizing them with our airstrikes, our presence, which does nothing but evoke more conflict.
I have friends who were saying this to me a couple of years ago who had served in Afghanistan, both military and civilians. It just doesn't make any sense. It's just, there's a failure in logic here. There's a failure in just common sense.
Okay. Well, finally, since we're at the end here, I want to say you have risen above the failure of most of your colleagues, I have to say, with all the respect I'm sure you have for them. Mm-hmm. And I can understand that. But their failure to decide to speak publicly and to break the silence to the public, to outsiders, to the voters, to the Congress, about what they themselves know is the reality of that situation. You have not failed your oath of office to inform the Congress and to involve them in this process as the Constitution calls for. And you've spoken up. And really the reason I was so anxious to meet you, I came down here to meet you for no other reason, to congratulate you, but also to encourage you to realize that you have the power, I think, to inspire other people to do what you've done so far. And that is to tell the truth without concern for your own career and at the cost of career, because that's a kind of courage that is very rare. You've seen, and I've seen, courage on the battlefield that's virtually universal. Yeah. Everybody you see is being very brave in doing their mission, in helping their comrades, helping the team, doing it. Bravery of an uncommon sort is just routine almost. Yeah. And yet those same people, when they put on civilian clothes and become officials, who've risked their bodies, will not risk their clearance, their access, their career at all. They don't at all. So I really am so respectful of your willingness to give up the jobs you were offered by the ambassador, by Ambassador Holbrooke. I'm really impressed by that, and I hope very much that that example will be seen and emulated.
Well, thank you. And again, coming from a man like yourself, sir, that means quite a bit. I certainly didn't take the risks you took. I never had to worry about facing jail time or anything like that, or being charged with any crimes. But
what keeps people quiet is much less than a fear of prison. It's nothing other than a fear of being expelled from the team.
Yeah. But like I said, I appreciate those words. I can't tell you how much that means. For me, it was just a crisis of conscience that I got to the point where I said I can't participate any longer.
You know, I was your age, you're 36, right? I was your age when I came back from Vietnam, convinced after 2 years there that it was a losing proposition. I hadn't yet arrived at the realization from reading the Pentagon Papers that we had no right to be there following the French or supporting the French from the beginning. But that it was hopeless, that we ought to be out of there. But I spent 2 years, which you've missed. I wasted 2 years, doing what in effect Holbrooke offered, working from inside and telling the story inside. What the Pentagon Papers, which cover a 23-year period, and then it goes on beyond that, revealed was that the president doesn't need somebody to tell him the reality, like you or me, because he has people who do that.
Yeah.
He has heard it. They have heard it. They're getting the story in there, and for whatever reasons, careerist, ambition, political, I would say the reasons are very heavily political.
Yes.
He's ignoring it. So what you have the ability to do is to change the political environment in which he works, or someday she works, by going outside and working constitutionally to affect the understanding of the people who don't know the reality because they've been lied to by the administration because they haven't taken the effort, Congress, the public, the media, and so forth, telling them, not speaking truth to power inside and secretly, which is very seductive but has no real effect. But rather to tell the truth to the people who lack power because they don't know the truth, and you're empowering them by telling it. So that's what you're doing right now, and you absolutely made the right choice, and that's what I admire so much. It's very rare.
Thank you. I appreciate that very much.
Do that. All right, you're talking from somebody who went over there and the problems you faced when you went over there, as I went to Vietnam in 1965. And one gets caught up in the question of, couldn't this be done better? Surely better than we're doing, as it could have been.
And it's really easy, particularly this is what I did for my living for 12 years. So it's really easy just to have this conversation wrapped around the how of it or the mechanics of it, and that's not, we should be talking about the why.
No, and you and I could talk about that for a long time with great interest. But you said it so well in your resignation letter, and since then, that you didn't leave, you didn't take this unusual action, extraordinary action really, not only to leave, but to speak out and work against the policy, to try to warn people, not just quietly go on to some other line of business. They stand up and show capability and offensive fighting force and discipline and everything else. There's every prospect that the U.S. will use that as an excuse to leave, whereupon they lose. So their incentive to take over the fighting from the U.S. is nowhere on, I'm referring to the Vietnam experience, of course, as well, but I would sure it apply here as well, because on the one hand, if somebody else can do the fighting a lot better than you can anyway, because of their helicopters, their intelligence, their communications, their weapons and everything, why should you do it? That's one point. And the other point is, if you become capable to substitute yourself for them, they leave, in which case you're there alone and you cannot succeed. So there's really no incentive to ever, so long as the U.S. troops are there, to stand up and...
Brave New Conversations is funded by subscribers like you.
After 8 years of dropping how many millions of pounds of bombs, firing how many millions of rounds of ammunition, and on the other hand spending how many billions of dollars in development aid, if after 8 years people haven't joined your side, they're probably not going to join your side. Well, they probably have a good reason for being on another side than you.
And the point to keep gripping on to, too, is that these people who looked favorably on the Russians and now look favorably on us did not win. And part of the reason they were not able to win support, or to destroy or to neutralize the other people in that country. And there's no reason to think that it will happen now.
And just like Ambassador Eichenberry said in his dissent to the troop increase, which I'm very proud of. I'm very proud to have served with him, and especially proud to have seen his dissent. There's a dependency. After 8 years, the Afghan government is dependent upon us to do everything. And it was most likely the same way in the Soviets. That's why Najibullah only survived for 3 years, because he was dependent upon an outside power to keep him propped up. Same way with Karzai. He's dependent upon us to prop him up. And he's not even worthy to be propped up. He's corrupt, illegitimate, has no interests in bettering his country. Really only him and his people are only really interested in lining their pockets. And you see the people he surrounds himself with. War crimes, the people he surrounds himself with, like Fahim and Dastum. And these guys are war crimes villains, drug traffickers, and not like drug traffickers like they've got a pound of pot in their pocket. You're talking guys who are dealing in hundreds and thousands of kilos of heroin. These are very despicable, horrible people that our troops should not be dying in support of. It's a shame on us that they are.
Yeah, and another aspect of that I noticed in reading this stuff is we'll be there until they, the phrase they used in Vietnam, we'll stand down as they stand up. We're there to provide a shield while they will take over the task. Well, since they're well aware from past experience that they will never be able to do it by themselves, the more